She fainted out holding her baby. And no one came close, until a millionaire lifted her in his arms and carried her across the crowded plaza as if she weighed nothing. People parted, their curious eyes following the tall man in the impeccably tailored charcoal suit. He didn't look like someone who belonged there among the chipped marble columns and faded awnings of a neighborhood that had seen better days. Yet his gaze, sharp as the edge of a silver blade, softened when it fell on the woman unconscious against his chest and the small child clinging to her limp arm. He laid her carefully on the nearest bench and checked her pulse, oblivious to the phones discreetly raised to record the spectacle. A hush rippled through the onlookers as he pressed 2 fingers against her neck, his watch glinting in the late afternoon sun. The baby whimpered, a high, pitiful sound that cut through the silence like a warning bell. He glanced down and found a pair of enormous brown eyes staring up at him, glazed with confusion and fear. "Easy," he murmured, his voice unexpectedly gentle as he cupped the baby's back. "Your mother needs a little help." He turned to the crowd, scanning the frozen faces. "Water," he ordered, his tone shifting to something that brooked no refusal. "And someone call for a medic." A young woman, cheeks flushed with embarrassment, hurried into the cafe behind them. Another man pulled out his phone with shaking hands. But the millionaire's focus never wavered. He loosened the woman's threadbare scarf and brushed a stray wisp of hair from her clammy forehead. Her skin was too pale, her breathing shallow. He remembered her. 3 weeks ago, he'd seen her through the tinted glass of his car, struggling to carry groceries up the hill while the baby clutched at her coat. Something about the quiet dignity in her posture had lodged in his mind. He hadn't known her name then. He still didn't. But he knew he wasn't leaving her side. When the woman with the water returned, he dabbed it against the young mother's lips. The baby tried to grab the cup, and he shifted the child deftly into the crook of his arm, never dropping his calm, steady manner. It struck him, absurdly, how small the baby's hand looked against the fine wool of his suit jacket. Slowly, the woman stirred. Her lashes fluttered, and a faint, bewildered moan escaped her throat. The baby gurgled in relief. She tried to sit up, but he caught her shoulders and guided her back down. "Don't move yet," he said, voice low and certain. "You fainted. Help is coming." Her eyes focused on him then, wide and dark, and in that instant something shifted. He was accustomed to recognition in people's faces, sometimes admiration, sometimes envy, but this was different. She looked at him as if she had no idea who he was. As if he were simply a stranger who had decided to care. I'm sorry," her voice cracked. "My baby." "She's safe," he promised, glancing down at the little girl now pressing her cheek against his chest as if she belonged there. "You're both safe." A siren wailed in the distance. The crowd began to murmur again, some stepping forward now that it was clear the drama would soon be over. But he ignored them all. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, studying her face for any sign she might slip away again. "Eva," she whispered. "My name is Eva." "Eva," he repeated quietly, as if committing it to memory. "I'm Nicholas." Her gaze flickered over his features, confusion warring with gratitude. The name meant nothing to her, he realized. And for a fleeting moment, he was almost glad. The ambulance pulled up, brakes hissing. 2 paramedics jogged over with a stretcher. Nicholas shifted the baby back into Eva's arms with the same care he might have used to return a priceless artifact. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, she reached out a trembling hand and caught the sleeve of his jacket. "Thank you," she breathed, her eyes bright with tears she hadn't yet shed. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "Just let them take care of you." But as the paramedics began to wheel her away, Nicholas did something no one expected. He followed. The crowd parted again, whispering behind their hands. A woman with a child. A man worth more than the block they were standing on. And yet he walked beside the stretcher as if he had every right, every obligation, to see her safe. Eva watched him, her lashes heavy with exhaustion. "You don't have to." "I know," he said gently. "But I will." In that moment, she stopped protesting. At the ambulance doors, he paused, as if weighing something. Then he pulled a sleek phone from his pocket and tapped a number. His assistant answered instantly. "Matthew. I need you to meet me at St. Anne's Hospital. Arrange for private care." And find out everything you can about a woman named Eva. She has a baby girl, maybe a year old." There was a beat of silence on the line. Nicholas could almost hear the unspoken questions. He didn't care. "Yes, sir," Matthew said at last. He ended the call and climbed into the ambulance without hesitation. The paramedics exchanged wary glances but didn't stop him. Eva's head lolled against the pillow. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed but searching. When she saw him seated beside her, she gave a tiny, incredulous shake of her head. "Why?" she whispered, voice so faint he had to lean close to hear. Nicholas watched her for a long moment, the siren wailing around them, before answering in a voice she would remember long after everything else had blurred into a haze of sirens and lights. "Because sometimes," he said, "it matters that someone sees you." She didn't know how to reply to that. The words hovered between them, heavier than the oxygen tank and the antiseptic air. She wanted to close her eyes and drift away from the embarrassment and confusion clawing at her chest, but she couldn't look away from him. From this man whose kindness didn't fit anything she knew about the world. Nicholas felt the ambulance lurch around a corner, felt the baby's small, drowsy sigh against her mother's arm. He studied Eva's face, the hollowed cheeks, the faint bruise beneath her eye she'd tried to conceal with powder. All at once he felt an unexpected rage. Rage at a universe where a woman could be so alone that she'd collapse in the middle of the street and no one would come. Except he had. He didn't know why. Or perhaps he did, but he wasn't ready to look too closely at the answer. When they reached the hospital, the doors swung open and warm air flooded the compartment. The paramedics moved with brisk efficiency, lifting Eva from the ambulance. Nicholas followed without hesitation, ignoring the nurse's startled look when she realized he wasn't a relative. Inside, fluorescent lights beat down on gleaming tile floors. Someone wheeled a curtain aside, gesturing for them to bring Eva into a narrow bay with a monitoring station. "We'll take it from here," the nurse said gently but firmly, motioning for Nicholas to step back. He hesitated, his hand still braced on the stretcher rail. Eva's eyes opened again, searching for him in the shifting chaos of white coats and beeping machines. He knew he should let go. Walk out. Return to his world of polished boardrooms and discreetly curated philanthropy. But her fingers crept weakly toward his, and the question she'd whispered in the ambulance echoed in his mind. "Why?" Because no one had seen her until today. And because something about the way she looked at him, like she was waiting to wake up from this strange reprieve, made him want to prove that he wouldn't disappear when the adrenaline wore off. "I'll be right outside," he said, voice low. "I won't leave." Her lips parted as if she might object, but no words came. She only nodded, so slight he wondered if he'd imagined it. The nurse closed the curtain. For a moment, Nicholas stood staring at the pale blue fabric as muffled instructions floated out. Blood pressure readings, requests for 4 fluids, the baby's fretful cries. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and turned to find a place to wait. The hallway smelled of overbrewed coffee and lemon disinfectant. A receptionist behind the counter kept darting curious glances his way. He knew what she saw, the expensive watch, the hand-stitched suit, the aura of a man accustomed to control. He pulled out his phone again and scrolled through the messages piling up. Board approvals, shareholder updates, a reminder about the gala he was scheduled to host in less than 3 hours. His thumb hovered over the reply icon. Then he locked the screen and slid the phone back into his pocket. Let them wait. Minutes stretched, then an hour. A doctor emerged from behind the curtain, and Nicholas straightened, his heart tripping in a way he hadn't expected. "She's stable," the doctor said without preamble. "Severe dehydration and exhaustion, but nothing we can't manage. We've given her fluids. We'd like to keep her overnight for observation." Nicholas nodded. "Her baby?" "She's fine. Hungry, but fine. Do you know if there's anyone we can call for her?" "No," he admitted, feeling the strange weight of that single word. "I don't." The doctor studied him a moment longer, then seemed to decide it didn't matter. "All right. She can have visitors in a little while." When the doctor moved on, Nicholas walked back to the curtain and paused. His reflection wavered in the glass of a supply cabinet, a man who had never, in all his life, known what it was to be needed by a stranger. He didn't knock. Instead, he waited until the nurse emerged carrying the baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. The child turned her solemn gaze up at him as if she remembered He had been there before anyone else dared to come near. "Would you mind?" the nurse asked. "Just while we finish checking her mother's vitals." He swallowed. Then, carefully, he held out his arms. The baby settled into him without fuss, her cheek resting on the fine wool of his lapel. Nicholas felt a strange tightness in his throat. He'd never held a child before. It was different than he'd imagined. Fragile, yes, but also grounding. He eased into a plastic chair and let her small warm weight remind him that sometimes life happened without warning, defying every plan and every polished script. When the curtain finally drew back again, Eva looked almost herself. Her skin had regained some color. She tried to sit up when she saw him, but he shook his head. "Don't," he said quietly. "You need to rest." Her gaze drifted to the baby curled in his arms. "You didn't have to stay." He looked at her steadily. "I know." Tears shimmered along her lashes. She blinked them away and folded her hands over the thin hospital blanket, as though bracing herself. "I don't have anyone," she confessed in a voice so small it barely reached him. "I thought I could manage. I've been trying to find work, to keep up with rent. But it's—" Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together hard. Nicholas didn't interrupt. He simply listened. He could feel the baby's soft breathing against his chest. When Eva finally looked up, there was something defiant in her expression. "I don't want pity. This isn't pity." He said it with a calm certainty that startled them both. "It's respect. You've held your world together with your bare hands. But you don't have to do it alone anymore." Her brows knit together. "Why would you say that?" He took a breath and realized he didn't have a perfect answer. Only the raw, unpolished truth. "Because I can help," he said finally. "And because sometimes life gives you one chance to do the right thing before you walk away and regret it forever." She looked away, her throat working as she tried to swallow the emotions that trembled behind her eyes. The baby stirred in his arms, a small whimper of hunger. Eva reached out instinctively, her fingertips brushing the child's cheek. He handed her over carefully, watching as she curled the little girl close and pressed her lips to her downy hair. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Nicholas told her, his voice steady. "Not yet." Outside the window, dusk had begun to fall, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and rose. He knew that if he stayed much longer, he'd miss the gala. The press would speculate. His board would question his priorities. He didn't care. He pulled out his phone one more time and sent a brief text. "Cancel everything tonight. Personal emergency. ****. Then he slipped it back into his pocket and turned back to Eva, who was cradling her baby as if the world had narrowed to the safety of that moment. For the first time in years, Nicholas felt something ease in his chest, like a lock he hadn't known was there had finally turned. He sat there long after the nurses had stopped glancing his way with open curiosity, long after the sun had slid below the rooftops and left the ward aglow in the tender hush of early evening. The monitors pulsed their quiet rhythm, and the baby fell asleep against Eva's heart, her tiny hand curled protectively against her mother's collarbone. For a moment, Nicholas simply watched them, absorbing a sight he didn't know he'd been waiting to witness. It was so ordinary, so achingly human, this fierce, exhausted love that had kept Eva upright when the world offered her nothing in return. And though he knew he could never erase what she had been through, he also knew with an unshakable certainty that this was the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, and studied her face. She was so young. Younger than he'd first thought, her eyes too old for her years. Life had carved worry into every line around her mouth, but in that moment, with her child sleeping safely in her arms, she looked almost luminous. Eva must have felt his gaze, because she glanced up, her lashes dark crescents against her pale skin. She didn't smile exactly, but her eyes softened, a fragile trust flickering to life where only wary caution had lived before. "I still don't understand why you're here," she murmured. He searched for the right words and found that for once, they didn't feel polished or rehearsed. They were honest, and that made them powerful. "Because you deserve better than this," he said quietly. "Because no one should be invisible." Her chin wobbled. She looked away quickly, pressing her lips to the baby's hair as though she could hide the tremor in her shoulders. "People will say I'm after something," she whispered. "They'll think I planned this." He exhaled slowly. "People will say what they always say. That doesn't make it true." Her throat worked. "And what if I can't pay you back?" Nicholas sat back, feeling the oddest peace settle into his bones. "Then you don't." She swallowed, a single tear slipping free despite her effort to blink it back. He wanted to reach for her, to offer some comfort that didn't feel condescending or transactional, but he understood she needed her dignity more than she needed his hand. So he stayed still, offering presence instead of pity. At last, she looked up, her expression fragile and resolute all at once. "What happens now?" It was a fair question, but the truth was, he hadn't planned that far ahead. All he knew was he couldn't walk away. He pulled a sleek leather card case from his jacket and set it on the bedside table. "This is my direct number," he said, his voice even. "And my assistance. Anything you need, anything, call. I'll make sure you and your daughter have a safe place to stay." Eva stared at the card, her brow furrowing as if she couldn't quite reconcile the reality in front of her. "You don't even know me," she said finally, her voice hushed with wonder and disbelief. Nicholas's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe that's true," he agreed. "But I'd like to." The words hovered between them, simple and profound in their sincerity. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The monitors beeped softly, and somewhere down the hall, a baby cried for its mother. The city moved on without them, unaware that something had shifted in this small hospital room, something that had nothing to do with money or circumstance, and everything to do with two people deciding that this moment, this quiet act of grace, could change everything. The nurse returned to check Eva's vitals, casting a curious look at Nicholas before bustling around the bed. When she finished, she nodded toward the baby. "If you're staying, she'll need a bottle soon." Eva opened her mouth, ready to apologize for needing so much, but Nicholas lifted a hand. "I'll get it." He rose and walked out into the hall, the fluorescent lights briefly harsh on his face. A volunteer directed him to the small family pantry stocked with formula and sterilized bottles. As he prepared the bottle, he thought of all the times he'd dismissed the needs of strangers because he believed someone else would step in. He'd never imagined how different it felt when there was no one else, when the moment of choice belonged to you alone. When he returned, Eva was sitting up a little higher, her hair pulled back from her damp temples, her baby stirring with sleepy hunger. She looked at Nicholas as if she wasn't sure how to accept one more kindness, and he realized that this was what power was meant to be, not leverage or control, but the quiet ability to give without demanding anything in return. He handed her the bottle and watched her cradle her child close, guiding the nipple into her searching mouth. The baby latched on with a tiny sigh, and Eva closed her eyes, a shuddering breath escaping her lungs. "You don't have to stay," she said after a moment, her voice almost too soft to hear. "I know." He settled back into the chair anyway. "But I want to." Her lips parted, but she didn't argue. Slowly, the tension began to ease from her shoulders. Hours passed in gentle increments, the baby feeding and drifting back to sleep, Eva dozing in brief fits, Nicholas stepping out to speak to the doctor, to arrange for a private room, to authorize payment. No one questioned him again. They only nodded and made it happen, accustomed to the deference his name commanded. But in the hush of that room, stripped of all pretense, he wasn't a billionaire or a headline. He was simply the man who had chosen to care when everyone else kept walking. When dawn crept across the city, Nicholas watched the light slip over Eva's face. She stirred awake, blinking up at him with the startled disorientation of someone who hadn't expected to see another day. "You stayed all night," she said, her voice husky. He nodded, feeling a slow, quiet relief as he realized he didn't regret a single moment. "I wanted you to know," he said softly, "that you were never alone." Her eyes shimmered, bright and unguarded in the pale morning light. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. Nicholas felt something in his chest settle, like a compass finding true north. He reached for her hand, just once, gently, and she let him. In that fragile connection, he understood that whatever happened next would not be defined by pity or obligation. It would be shaped by the simple, unshakable belief that every life mattered, that no one deserved to be unseen. And as the city beyond the glass awoke to a new day, Nicholas knew that he had found something rarer than all his wealth, a purpose that had nothing to do with empire and everything to do with compassion. Eva held his gaze, her hand warm in his, and for the first time in years, he felt as though he was exactly where he was meant to be.